While she was undergoing her transformation at Odo Oro, life was proceeding normally for her family. Jagun came home from the farm as evening approached, tired but satisfied with his day's work. His visit to Odo Oro that morning had indeed helped his aching muscles. He felt rejuvenated. Korewa returned from the nearby river where she'd been washing clothes and fetching water. She was also tired, but in good spirits. The two boys, Olu and Ire, came home shortly after their father. They gathered in the house, expecting to find Abike there, having completed her chores. But the house was empty. Abike must be at the home of one of her friends, Korewa said to the rest of the family. Nobody was worried, yet. This was normal. Abike often visited friends after completing her house chores, especially if her mother hadn't returned from the river yet. It gave her a chance to socialize, to play, to be young. So it was not unusual for Korewa to come back home and not find her daughter there. She'll be home soon, Jagun said, probably chattering away with her friends, losing track of time. They began preparing dinner, setting the table, the usual evening routine. But as it started to grow darker and dinner time arrived, their mood changed. Abike always came home for dinner, always. She loved her mother's cooking too much to miss it, and she knew better than to worry them by staying out after dark without permission. Anxiety crept in. Olu, Ire, go and look for Abike at her friends' homes, Korewa told her sons. She listed several names, girls that Abike often played with. It's unlike her not to be here at supper time, unless she had warned us in advance, she added, perplexed. Did she say she was going anywhere else? No, Mother, the boys said at the same time. They left immediately, visiting one friend's house after another. But Abike wasn't at any of them. Worse, none of her friends had seen her all day. She hadn't visited anyone. When Olu and Ire came back without their sister, the whole family was thrown into panic. Once panic set in, they began to search more systematically. Where can she possibly be? Korewa asked, her voice rising with worry. She would have told one of us if she was going somewhere. Let's look around the house. Maybe we'll be able to find some clues as to her whereabouts. And then Korewa noticed something that made her blood run cold. One of the buckets for bathing is missing, the blue one. Could Abike have gone to fetch water? If she has, where? The family gathered around Korewa, processing this information. But she has never done so before. She doesn't know how. She's never been to the river to fetch water. Jagun's mind was working. Could she have heard us talking this morning about fetching water? About how you wanted her to start helping? Possibly, but then I didn't see her at the river where I was throughout the time that I was there washing clothes and fetching water. Surely this is where she would have come if she wanted to fetch water. It made sense. If Abike wanted to surprise her mother by fetching water, she would go to the river her mother always used, the nearby safe river. Let's go to the other rivers in town to check, Ire suggested. And so the two brothers left again, this time checking every river they could think of. They went from one to the other, asking people if they'd seen a girl matching their sister's description, showing increasing desperation with each negative answer. But they didn't find Abike at any of them. It would never have occurred to them to try Odo Oro. Never. That was unthinkable. Their sister might be disobedient, might be curious, might be daring. But going to Odo Oro? That was beyond recklessness. That was suicidal. No, their sister wouldn't do that. She couldn't have. When the brothers returned empty-handed, the family knew they needed help. This was beyond what they could handle alone. This was how the official search for Abike began. Abike's family appealed to relatives, friends, and neighbors for help, and in their community, people responded. In those days, when someone went missing, the entire community mobilized. Search parties were organized. The town was divided into sections. Every building, every field, every path was checked and double-checked. Still, no Abike. Finally, desperately, the family approached the village king. In those days, kings played an important role in the day-to-day lives of their subjects. They weren't distant rulers, but involved leaders who were called upon to settle disputes, solve mysteries, help in crises. A king was expected to take personal interest in his people's problems, no matter how small or seemingly inconsequential. When Jagun and Korewa presented themselves before the king and explained their situation, he listened gravely. "This is deeply concerning," he said. "I will send out an official search party for Abike. We will find her." For 3 days they searched, 3 long, agonizing days. They combed through forests, they checked neighboring towns, they questioned travelers. They left no stone unturned. But they could not find her. After 3 days, with heavy hearts, they gave up. In those times, without modern technology, without communication networks, when someone disappeared without a trace for 3 days, the likelihood of finding them alive diminished to almost nothing. Abike was presumed dead. Her father, mother, and brothers grieved. The whole community grieved. A young life snuffed out. A daughter, a sister, gone forever. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that Abike wasn't dead. She was worse than dead. She was transformed, living a half-life beneath the waters of Odo Oro, no longer human, no longer free. And she would remain that way for months. Months passed. Abike's family tried to move on, tried to accept their loss, but then a rumor began. A rumor about a voice at Odo Oro, a voice that sang from beneath the water. And when that rumor reached Abike's mother, everything would change, because sometimes the impossible is actually true. Some months later, words started going around the town, whispers at first, then louder conversations, then something everyone was talking about. There was a phenomenon at Odo Oro. It started when a woman, her name has been lost to time, but her experience hasn't, went to Odo Oro. She was one of the brave few who occasionally visited the river during safe hours. As she approached the water, she saw something strange, a bucket floating on the surface, a blue bucket, but nobody was around, no person in sight. Curious, she waded in slightly and touched the bucket, and that's when she heard it. A female voice, singing. The music was strange and enchanting, unlike anything she'd heard before. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But most disturbingly, it seemed to come from deep beneath the water. She ran frantically. Where was this woman? Was she underwater? But that was impossible. No one could sing underwater. And the voice was so clear, so beautiful. The woman ran all the way back to town, breathless and terrified, to tell everyone what she'd experienced. "There's a water spirit at Odo Oro," she proclaimed. "I heard her singing from beneath the river." Some people believed her immediately. Others were skeptical. But curious individuals began visiting Odo Oro to test the story, and every single person who touched the water heard the same thing, a female voice singing. Always the same song, always when the water was touched, and always the singer was invisible. She must be a water spirit, people concluded, since nobody can see her. Ordinary humans can't live underwater. She sings whenever anyone touches the water. That's her curse, perhaps, or her nature. The news spread from household to household, from town to neighboring town, until it became the primary topic of conversation in the entire village. But as more and more attention was paid to the phenomenon, something else became clear. This wasn't just any song. The lyrics had meaning. They told a story. People started to realize that the voice could belong to someone like them, an ordinary person who had gone to Odo Oro and never came back, someone who had been transformed into something else. The song sang of regret, of longing for family, of being trapped, of disobedience and its consequences. And when those details spread far and wide, they eventually reached the ears of Abike's mother.
When Korewa heard about the phenomenon at Odo Oro, she was just passingly interested at first, another strange story about that mysterious river. But then, someone mentioned the words of the song, and her blood went cold. Could it be Abike singing? She said to her husband, her voice barely a whisper. Jagun looked at her as if she had lost her mind. What? Impossible. Think about it, Korewa continued, speaking faster now, the pieces coming together in her mind. Could she have gone to Odo Oro to fetch water and got caught up with the Oluweri ceremony? You remember that the blue bucket for bathing was missing the day she disappeared. Impossible, Jagun exclaimed again, but his voice was less certain. Abike wouldn't, she couldn't. But even as he said it, both of them were remembering their daughter, her curiosity, her fascination with Odo Oro, her disobedience, her pattern of doing exactly what she was told not to do. It's not that impossible when you think of it. When it's Abike we're talking about, she asks so many questions about that river. She was so curious, and that morning, you told me you were going there. What if she heard us? Jagun's face showed his inner turmoil. Part of him didn't want to believe it, couldn't believe it, but even he knew his wife was right. If it's so, where is she? What's the meaning of all this? Surely Abike can't be dead if she's singing, yet it's known that nobody who goes to Odo Oro on the wrong days comes back alive except the chief priest. He was baffled, devastated, trying to make sense of something that made no sense. The two brothers who had been listening to this conversation looked at each other. They'd been thinking the same thing their mother was thinking, but hadn't wanted to say it aloud. Mother, father, we'll go to Odo Oro, Ire offered. But it's not safe, Korewa began. Fear for her sons now added to her anguish over her daughter. Don't worry, we'll be careful, Odo assured her. We won't go there on the evening of Oluweri's ceremony. We'll go during the day when it's supposed to be safe. We just need to touch the water and listen. We'll know immediately if it's Abike.
The next morning, Olu and Ire set out for Odo Oro. The walk seemed longer than it was, each brother lost in his own thoughts. What if it was their sister? What if she was somehow trapped there? But how? And in what form? They arrived at the river. In daylight, it was as beautiful as everyone said. They could see why Abike might have been drawn to it, but knowing what they now knew, the beauty seemed menacing, deceptive. They approached the water's edge. Both brothers hesitated. What if this confirmed their worst fears? But they had to know. Olu knelt down and touched the water, just barely, his fingertips grazing the surface. And immediately, they heard it. A female voice, singing from what seemed like the very bottom of the river. The melody was haunting, the words were clear, and both brothers recognized it instantly. "It's her," Olu whispered. "It's Abike." Ire was crying. "Our sister. She's been here all along. But how? Where is she?" "Abike, Abike, where are you?" the brothers called out. "Can you hear us? It's Olu and Ire. We're here. We found you." But there was no answer. There was only the singing. When the song ended, there was silence, and when they touched the water again, the song repeated, exactly the same, like a recording. Everywhere around was quiet. Nobody was in sight. Not surprising, since hardly anyone came here, but the isolation made it worse. Their sister was here somewhere, somehow, and they couldn't reach her, couldn't help her. The boys stood there for a long time, touching the water, listening to their sister's voice, crying. Finally, they rushed home to tell their parents. The family now faced an impossible situation. Their daughter was alive, but not alive, present, but absent, singing, but unreachable. How do you rescue someone from a supernatural transformation? How do you bring back someone who has become something else? There was only one person who might have answers, one person who understood the mysteries of Odo Oro. But would he help them? And more importantly, could he? Jagun and Korewa went immediately to the palace to seek audience with the king. This time, they came not with uncertainty about their daughter's fate, but with impossible knowledge. Their daughter was at Odo Oro. She was singing. She was somehow alive, but they couldn't see her,
couldn't reach her, couldn't bring her home. The king received them with concern. He remembered Abike's case, the 3-day search that had yielded nothing. If Abike is the one singing, the king said thoughtfully after hearing their account, then she must still be alive. But where is she? What's happened to her? He paced his chamber, thinking. This was unlike anything in his experience as a ruler. Disputes about land? He could handle those. Conflicts between neighbors? No problem. But this required different kind of wisdom. I'll call a meeting of my advisors, he decided. Surely they should be able to come up with something we can do to bring Abike back to us. The meeting took place the following day. The king's advisors gathered, elderly men mostly, who had seen much in their lives and who were valued for their wisdom and knowledge. They discussed the phenomenon, debated its meaning, considered various explanations, but in the end, they kept returning to the same conclusion. This was beyond normal human understanding. This required someone with special knowledge. Finally, one of the oldest advisors spoke. The chief priest must be approached, he said. He should be able to advise us as to what to do. The chief priest is gifted in dealing with matters of this nature. If anyone can understand what's happened to Abike, it's him. There were murmurs of agreement around the chamber. The king nodded. Send for him immediately.
The chief priest arrived at the palace later that day. He was a man of indeterminate age. He could have been 50 or 70. It was hard to tell. His eyes held knowledge that seemed older than his face. He listened carefully as the situation was explained to him. Occasionally, he would nod. Sometimes his eyes would widen slightly. But mostly, he just listened with intense concentration. I've never heard of anything exactly like this before, he finally said, his voice measured and thoughtful. But nothing is impossible under the sun. In all my years dealing with the mysteries of Odo Oro, I've learned that the supernatural world operates by different rules than our own. He nodded pensively, thinking through the implications. Abike has obviously not been killed, he continued. That's what apparently happens to anyone who is unfortunate enough to be at Odo Oro at the wrong time. They're strangled by the water spirits and their bodies thrown into the river. But Abike is singing. That suggests something different happened to her. But what? The king asked. If she's alive, where is she? Why does she sing anytime the water is touched? And why can't we see her? Suddenly, the chief priest stopped speaking. His eyes widened as an idea occurred to him. Good gracious! She must be under there, under the water. She must have been turned into a water spirit like the rest of them. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. A human turned into a water spirit? Was such a thing possible? But the chief priest was nodding now, more certain. I've heard the story about Ma, the goddess of the river's remaining child, how she had been lost mysteriously, like Oluwari's other children, to a couple who couldn't have children, how the goddess of the river had been waiting for the day when her child would come to Odo Oro to fetch water or do her laundry and be reunited with her. He paused, remembering the details. Unless the child had married and had a child of her own by then, in which case the spell, or whatever supernatural force was at work, would be broken. Naturally, Ma would become a water spirit again like the rest of them. If she were reunited with her mother, she'd be transformed back into her original form. Whether the story is true or not, we don't know. How could such a thing even be possible? Besides, it is not Ma we're talking about here, but Abike. Nevertheless, he concluded, we have to accept that Abike has somehow been turned into a water spirit. It's the only explanation that makes sense of all the facts. A water spirit, the king repeated, in disbelief in his voice. He wanted to reject the idea, but what other explanation fit? But if she's a water spirit, how can we get her back? Can someone who's been transformed be untransformed? The chief priest nodded slowly. I've an idea. I'll go to Odo Oro and speak to the fairies. They know what happens there. They're closer to the water spirits than we are. If anyone knows how to help Abike, it's them. The chief priest went to Odo Oro the following day.
just as the sun was reaching its highest point in the sky, the safest time. As soon as he arrived, he went straight to the water's edge and touched it, just like Abike's brothers had done. And just like everyone else, he heard the singing. Abike's voice, beautiful and sad, rising from the depths. He listened to the entire song, his expression growing sadder with each verse. Here was a young girl transformed into something unnatural, crying out in the only way she could. After the song ended, he went in search of the fairies. Now this is important to understand. The chief priest had a unique relationship with Odo Oro. He was the only person who could go there at any time without danger, the only person the fairies would show themselves to reliably, the only person who had actually communicated with these supernatural beings. He found them near the edge of the woods, where they often gathered. When they saw him, they approached without fear. A girl called Abike is missing, he informed them without preamble. Everyone in town, including the girl's parents and the king himself, believes that she's the one singing anytime the water here is touched. Nobody knows where she is or what really happened to her. One of the fairies stepped forward. She seemed to be the one who had intervened to save Abike's life. "We saved a girl from strangulation some time ago when she came face to face here with the 3 water spirits and Oluwari, the overall goddess. She must be Abike. We liked her singing and appealed to Oluwari to turn her into Oluwari's daughter instead of killing her." The chief priest said nothing at first. He just nodded, processing this information. Another fairy spoke up. "Being a river goddess's daughter is not the life we would have chosen for Abike ordinarily, but we had to come up quickly with something to save her. There was nothing else we could have done at the time. We don't have the special powers they have. We can't transform people or undo transformations." The chief priest understood. The fairies had done what they could with the resources available to them. They'd saved Abike from death, but in doing so, they'd condemned her to a different kind of existence. "Please appeal to Oluwari to release Abike to her family. They've suffered enough. They've lost their daughter for months, and I'm sure Abike has learned a lesson in coming here against her parents' warnings. Listen to her song. She's full of regret and longing for home." The fairies looked at each other. They'd been thinking the same thing. "We'll see what we can do," one of the fairies said. "Abike has certainly learned a lesson and should go home. Come back tomorrow and we'll have an answer for you." The chief priest thanked them and left. But as he walked away from Odo Oro, he wondered, would Oluwari agree to release Abike? The goddess had wanted a daughter for so long. She'd lost all her other children. Would she give up this replacement daughter so easily? The fairies now faced a delicate task, convincing a goddess to give up the daughter she'd waited so long for. But they had a plan, a clever, risky plan that would appeal to Oluwari's pride. Would it work? Or would Abike remain trapped forever beneath the waters of Odo Oro? The negotiation that followed would determine everything. The fairies were not sure that Oluwari would want to release Abike. They knew the goddess had been enjoying having a daughter again, someone to sing for her, someone to care for her, someone to add beauty to her ceremonies. But they also knew that Abike was deeply unhappy. Every time she sang, they could hear the longing in her voice, the regret, the desperate desire to see her family again. So that same evening, which happened to be one of the nights of the ceremony in honor of Oluwari, the fairies approached the goddess.
Oluwari was in high spirits. The ceremony had been particularly beautiful that evening, with Abike's singing adding a special touch. The 3 water spirits had been pleased. Everything had gone perfectly. The fairies waited for the right moment. Then one of them spoke. "Abike is your daughter," she began carefully. "She's a very beautiful girl. There's no denying that." Oluwari smiled, clearly pleased by this acknowledgement. "Yes, she is beautiful, isn't she? Almost as beautiful as my lost Ma." The fairy continued, "But we've been thinking. Abike is very beautiful. supposing the three water spirits decide to honor her as well as you, or instead of you. They'll never do that, Oluwedi exclaimed, clearly astounded by the suggestion. The idea hadn't occurred to her, and now that it had been planted, it was clearly disturbing. Are you sure? The fairy pressed gently. You know that you're considered the most beautiful of all the water spirits. That's one of the main reasons you've been chosen as the overall goddess by them. They honor you for your beauty, but Abike is also exceptionally beautiful, and she's new. Novelty can be very appealing. Oluwedi's expression changed. She was considering this now, and she didn't like where her thoughts were taking her. What about the special powers I have? She protested. I transformed Abike into one of us. No one else can do that. Abike may be beautiful, but she does not possess the powers I have. The fairy had anticipated this argument. The three water spirits are not too bothered about your powers, though, she replied. They have their own powers, which they exercise on any mortals they see around here, as you know. One is blind, one is deaf, and the third is crippled, remember? And they have the powers to inflict their disabilities on any mortals who are unlucky enough to come face to face with them, and with you. They honor you because they see you as having no defects, as perfect, as the most beautiful creature in the sea. Another fairy joined in. Is it worth risking all that in keeping Abike? After all, she is not really your daughter, no matter how much she may resemble Ma. And do you really need a daughter now? A third fairy added, nobody except us knows that you have Abike as a daughter, but everyone knows that there's an overall goddess called Oluwedi. Your status, your position, your honor, those are public. Those are what matter. Those are what you could lose. Oluwedi fell silent. The fairies could see her thinking, weighing, calculating. She had been enjoying having Abike around. There was no denying it. The singing was beautiful. The attention and care Abike gave her was gratifying. Having a daughter again, even if not her real daughter, had filled a void she'd been living with for so long. But what the fairies were saying made sense, and more than that, it played on her deepest fear, losing her status as the overall water goddess. Being honored above all others, that's who she was. That was her identity. That was what gave her existence meaning. Could she risk that for a daughter who wasn't even really hers? That's true, she finally answered, her voice thoughtful. I do value being the overall water goddess, very much. She thought over the matter more deeply. Memories of her real children, the ones she'd lost, flashed through her mind, the pain of those losses, but also the acceptance she'd eventually reached. She'd survived those losses. She could survive this one too. But what shall we do with Abike then, if she's no longer my daughter? Are you saying that she should be strangled and thrown into the river like the others, like she would have been if you hadn't intervened? No, 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 all the fairies shouted, at the same time, horrified by the suggestion. It's good she wasn't killed, one fairy said quickly. We don't want that now either. She should be returned to her parents. Abike doesn't belong here. She never did. She misses her people terribly, another fairy added. She's pining away. Listen to her song, really listen to it. Every word is about regret and longing for home. She shouldn't have come here then, Oluwedi answered sternly, a flash of her authority showing. But listen to the words of her song about Odo Oro. Perhaps nobody properly warned her about coming here. Perhaps she just wanted to help her parents when she came to fetch water. You yourself have been saying since Abike arrived that she's an obedient, thoughtful, and helpful girl. Well, since she's been with you, she's been obedient, thoughtful, and helpful, hasn't she? She's sung whenever you asked, she's honored your ceremonies, she's cared for you. Those qualities are in her. Even if she disobeyed her parents in coming here initially, she has learned a lesson by being here with you, away from her family and friends all this time. It's a miserable life for her. Being a water spirit when you're born human, when you have a family that loves you, when you have a whole life waiting for you, it's a punishment worse than death in some ways. I'm sure she won't come to Odo Oro ever again, another fairy added emphatically.
This experience has changed her, transformed her in more ways than just the physical. She's learned the lesson her parents tried to teach her. She understands now why boundaries exist, why warnings matter. Oluwedi listened to everything that the fairies were saying to her, and gradually, slowly, reluctantly, but genuinely, she started to feel sorry for Abike and for Abike's family. She knew, though it hurt to admit, that turning Abike into a river goddess's daughter and having her live among them had been punishment enough for the girl. The lesson had been learned, the price had been paid. "All right," she finally conceded, her voice soft. "Tell the chief priest that I'll grant his wish. Abike will be ready to go back to her family tomorrow." The fairies could barely contain their joy. They thanked Oluwedi profusely, bowing and expressing their gratitude. As soon as they left, Oluwedi sat alone for a moment, feeling the weight of her decision. She was losing a daughter again, but this time it was her choice. This time she was choosing to let go. She asked the 3 water spirits to bring Abike before her. After months of living as something she wasn't, Abike was about to hear words she'd stopped believing she'd ever hear, words that would return her to her family. But would her experience change her? Could someone go through such a transformation and return to normal life?
When Abike was brought before Oluwere, she had no idea what to expect. In her months as a water spirit, she'd learned to expect nothing good, to simply exist in a state of profound sadness and longing. Oluwere looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. Sadness? Resignation? Affection? "Abike," the goddess began, "I'm sending you back to your family." Abike could not believe her ears. She stood frozen, certain she'd misheard. Sending her back? Back to her family? Back to being human? "I know life here away from them is hard for you," Oluwere continued. "I've heard it in your song every time you sing, the longing, the regret, the desire to go home. Your experience with us has turned you into a different person," she said. "You've been a good, obedient, and helpful child to me. You've honored my ceremonies with your beautiful singing. You've cared for me as a daughter should. Continue to be that person when you return," Oluwere advised. "Be obedient to your real parents, be helpful, be thoughtful, and I'm sure they will be happy with the changes they see in you." Abike wanted to speak, to thank her, to express the overwhelming relief and joy she felt, but no words came. She just stood there, trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Tomorrow," Oluwere said, "you'll be handed over to the chief priest who will take you back to your parents. Go now, rest. Tomorrow, you return to your former life." As Abike turned to leave, Oluwere chatted softly, almost to herself. "Be grateful for your family, child. Not everyone is so fortunate to have a second chance." That night was the longest of Abike's life, longer even than the first night she'd spent transformed, confused, terrified. Now she was filled with a different kind of fear. What if Oluwere changed her mind? What if this was some kind of cruel trick? What if something went wrong? But when morning came, Oluwere kept her word. The goddess used her powers to transform Abike back to her former self. It was like reversing a river's flow, complex, powerful, requiring immense supernatural energy. Abike felt her body changing. The watery essence that had replaced her blood became blood again. Her skin, which had taken on a luminous, otherworldly quality, became normal human skin. Her connection to the river, which had felt like an invisible tether, severed. She was human again, fully, completely human. The fairies were waiting to escort her to the chief priest. They'd kept watch all night, wanting to ensure everything went smoothly. As they walked with Abike through the landscape around Odo Oro, a landscape she'd been unable to leave for months, she felt every step as a miracle. She was leaving. She was really leaving. The chief priest was waiting near the river, exactly where the fairies had told him to be. When he saw Abike, in person, in solid human form, not just a voice from beneath the water,
His face broke into a smile. "Thank you very much," he said to the fairies, who waved at him and Abike as they both turned to leave Odo Oro. The fairies watched them go. They felt satisfied. They'd saved Abike from death, and now they'd helped secure her release. It was a good outcome, better than most who came to Odo Oro at the wrong time could hope for. As Abike and the chief priest walked away from the river, he warned her seriously. "Never, ever go near Odo Oro again. You've been given a second chance that almost no one receives. Don't waste it. Don't test fate again. Promise me." "I promise," I said, her voice barely a whisper. "I promise I'll never go back there. Never." And she meant it with every fiber of her being. The chief priest took Abike to her parents' home. As they approached the familiar compound, Abiyake's heart began to race. What would her family say? Would they be angry? Would they blame her? After months of grief, would they even believe it was really her? The chief priest called out, "Jagun, Korewa, come quickly." The family rushed out. Jagun, Korewa, Olu, and Ire. They froze when they saw her. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if time itself had stopped. And then Korewa screamed, not in fear, but in joy, in overwhelming, impossible joy. "Abike, my daughter, my daughter!" They all rushed forward at once, pulling Abike into their arms. Everyone was crying, deep, body-shaking sobs of relief and happiness and disbelief. They hugged and hugged each other, unable to let go, afraid that if they did, she might disappear again. "Mother, Father, I'm so happy to see you again. I never thought I'd do so. I've been so unhappy. I'll never disobey you again. I'm a different person now." The words poured out of her, all the regret, all the lessons learned, all the transformation that had occurred, not just physically, but spiritually, mentally, emotionally. Abike had been so unhappy as a water spirit. She'd learned a harsh lesson about disobedience. She could have been killed, or she could have disappeared forever if the fairies hadn't intervened, if the chief priest hadn't negotiated, if Olawere hadn't finally agreed to release her. Have you ever been Abike, ignoring warnings, thinking you knew better, pursuing something forbidden or dangerous because it seemed exciting, or because you thought the rules didn't apply to you? If so, were you fortunate enough to get a second chance, to learn from the experience without permanent harm? If you enjoyed this deep dive into African folklore, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. We have so many more incredible stories to share with you. Until then, stay curious, but stay wise. Respect the boundaries that exist for good reasons. And remember, not everyone gets a second chance.